The old cabin always felt off. Not haunted, not exactly, just quiet. Too quiet. My grandpa, bless his pragmatic soul, bought it back in the 70s, deep in the Appalachian foothills. Said it was a steal. Said the previous owner just upped and left one day. No forwarding address. Just vanished. Grandpa used to laugh about it, a gruff, rumbling sound that always seemed to cut through the unnatural stillness of the place. He called it the Hermit's Hideaway and said the previous guy probably just got sick of people. Now, after his passing, it was mine. A dilapidated, dusty inheritance that I, a city boy through and through, had no real business owning. My name's Alex, and I'm 28. I design software, live in a cramped apartment in Atlanta, and my idea of roughing it is when the Wi-Fi signal drops. So, why was I here? Loneliness, probably. After a particularly brutal breakup and a string of late nights staring at lines of code that refused to cooperate, the cabin felt like a desperate escape. A place to truly unplug, to grieve, to just be. That was the theory, anyway. I arrived late in the afternoon, the old pickup truck groaning up the winding dirt track that felt less like a road and more like a forgotten scar on the mountainside. The tree line pressed in, dense and ancient, blocking out most of the late summer sun. The air was thick with the smell of pine, damp earth, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like distant rain on hot asphalt, but sharper. It sent a shiver down my spine, despite the humidity. The cabin itself was small, 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, perched on a slight rise overlooking a narrow, overgrown clearing. Its windows, dark and empty, stared out like vacant eyes. The first few days were peaceful in a disquieting way. I unpacked a few essentials, a battered old cooler, a stack of books I'd never get around to reading, a battery-powered lantern, and my grandfather's old hunting rifle. A heavy, cold piece of steel I'd never fired in my life, but which provided a strange, illusory sense of security. There was no electricity, no running water, just a well pump that yielded surprisingly clear, cold water, and a stubborn wood-burning stove that filled the tiny cabin with the comforting smell of wood smoke, battling the perpetual chill that seemed to cling to the place. I spent my mornings exploring the immediate vicinity, trying to map out the tangled paths that led deeper into the woods. The trees here weren't like city park trees. They were giants, their branches interlocking overhead to form a perpetual twilight. The silence was profound, broken only by the rustle of unseen critters, the distant call of a hawk, or the gentle sigh of wind through the leaves. It was the kind of silence that made your own heartbeat sound like a drum. It was on the 3rd day that I noticed it. Noticed them. At first, I dismissed it as an anomaly, a trick of the light. Small, almost imperceptible cairns of stones. Not natural rock formations. These were clearly deliberate, stacked haphazardly, almost childishly, along the faint deer trails I was following. Just a few stones, maybe 2 or 3, balanced one atop the other. I'd kick them over, assuming some local kid had been playing around. But then I'd find more, always just off the path, nestled amongst the undergrowth, always small, always 3 stones. It started to nag at me. I'd walk a new route, convinced I was seeing things, only to stumble upon another one, perfectly aligned, almost mocking in its simplicity. My rational brain tried to explain it away. Campers, hikers, some obscure local tradition. But the utter isolation of the place argued against it. I hadn't seen another soul since I arrived. No tire tracks on the dirt road, no discarded candy wrappers, no footprints but my own. That night, the silence of the cabin felt heavier than usual. The lantern cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, making the familiar shapes of my grandfather's worn armchair or the stacked crates of canned goods seem monstrous. I found myself staring out the window, past the glass that reflected my own anxious face, into the absolute blackness of the woods. The metallic, sweet smell was back, stronger now, almost cloying. It was like something was blooming in the night, something unnatural. I remembered something my grandpa had said once, years ago, when I was just a kid and we were visiting the cabin for a day trip. He'd been cutting firewood, and I'd wandered off, fascinated by a particularly bright red mushroom. He'd found me quickly, his face unusually grim. "Alex," he'd said, his voice low, "you don't wander off the paths here. You don't go poking around where you don't belong. This isn't your backyard. These woods, they've got their own rules." I'd shrugged it off then, a kid eager to explore. Now, his words echoed in the oppressive quiet, taking on a new, chilling significance. I tried to sleep, but my mind was racing. Every creak of the old wood, every rustle of leaves outside sounded amplified, distorted. Was it just the wind or something else? I kept picturing those little stone stacks. 3 stones. Why 3? My eyes drifted to the small, scratched wooden table near the window where I'd left my grandfather's rifle. It looked so utterly useless against the kind of dread that was seeping into the cabin, a cold, insidious fear that had nothing to do with bears or bobcats. I got up, restless, and walked to the door. The latch felt cold under my fingers. I hesitated, then pushed it open just a crack. The night air rushed in, thick and cold, carrying that strange, sweet smell. It was almost intoxicating now, drawing me in. And then I saw it. Just beyond the clearing, at the very edge of the tree line, a faint, flickering light. Not a fire, not a lantern. It pulsed, a soft, ethereal glow, like a distant will-o'-the-wisp. It was too far to be a human light source, too deep in the unmappable wilderness. My heart hammered against my ribs. Logic screamed at me to close the door, to ignore it, to dismiss it as an illusion born of sleeplessness and fear. But something else, a primal curiosity mingled with a profound sense of unease, held me there. The light pulsed again, brighter this time, a beacon in the inky blackness. And as it pulsed, I swear I could hear it, a faint, almost inaudible whisper, carried on the night breeze. It wasn't words, not exactly, more like a soft, drawn-out sibilance, like air escaping a punctured tire, but with an underlying cadence, almost like a sigh. It was calling, and for the first time in that suffocating silence, I felt truly, utterly alone, but also, strangely, not, like something was watching, waiting. The light vanished as abruptly as it appeared, leaving the night even darker, the silence even more profound. My breath hitched in my throat, and I slammed the door shut, fumbling with the heavy bolt. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grasp the metal. I leaned against the door, heart pounding, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. A trick of the eyes, swamp gas, the reflection of a distant star on something metallic. Anything but what my gut screamed it was, something utterly unnatural. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every creak of the cabin's ancient timbers sounded like footsteps approaching. The metallic, sweet smell intensified, filling the small space until it felt suffocating, making my head ache. It was like living inside a giant decaying flower, but a flower with teeth. The next morning, the world outside looked deceptively normal. The sun was filtering through the canopy, painting dappled patterns on the forest floor. The birds were singing. The air, though still carrying that strange scent, felt cleaner, less oppressive. It was almost enough to convince me I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. But the memory of that pulsing light and the phantom whisper was etched into my mind. I tried to act normal. I fetched water from the well, splitting a meager pile of firewood. But my movements were jerky, my eyes constantly darting to the tree line, to the edge of the clearing where I'd seen the light. The cairns, the light, the whisper. It was all connected, I knew it. But to what? As I was hauling a bucket of water back to the cabin, I noticed something new, something that made my blood run cold. On the dusty ground, just a few feet from the cabin's porch, there was a faint indentation, a footprint, not mine, too large, and unlike any human foot I'd ever seen. It was long, narrow, with what looked like 4 distinct toes, clawed. It wasn't deep, as if whatever made it had barely touched the earth, but it was unmistakably there. And beside it, partially obscured by a fallen leaf, was another small stack of 3 stones. My stomach churned. This wasn't a game. This wasn't local kids. Something was out there. Something that had been at my doorstep while I lay inside, paralyzed by fear. The thought made my skin crawl. The rifle. I needed the rifle. It was a useless thought. What would I even shoot? But the primal need for a weapon, any weapon, surged through me. I spent the rest of the day indoors, barricaded. I dragged my grandfather's heavy wooden chest against the door, piled books against the windows, even though I knew it was futile. This thing, whatever it wasn't deterred by a flimsy cabin. I cleaned the rifle, the familiar scent of gun oil a strange comfort in the claustrophobic silence. It felt heavy in my hands, solid, but my hands were still shaking. As dusk approached, the forest began its subtle transformation. The shadows lengthened, twisting into grotesque shapes. The chirping of birds faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind, sounds that now held a sinister edge. And that smell. It was almost overwhelming now, a sickly sweet perfume that seemed to cling to everything, making the air feel heavy, difficult to breathe. It permeated the cabin, sticking to my clothes, my skin, my very lungs. I lit the lantern, its small flame a defiant flicker against the encroaching darkness. I sat by the window, rifle across my lap, staring out into the deepening gloom. My eyes strained, trying to pierce the blackness, to catch any movement, any flicker of that impossible light. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. A prank? Unlikely, given the remoteness. A reclusive, disturbed individual? Possibly. But the footprint. The clawed footprint. Then I heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from the side of the cabin. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like something dragging across the rough wood. My heart leaped into my throat. I held my breath, straining my ears. The sound moved, slowly, deliberately, towards the front of the cabin, towards the porch. I squeezed the rifle, my knuckles white. My mouth was dry. I swallowed hard, but it felt like sandpaper. The scraping stopped directly in front of the door, and then a new sound. A soft, rhythmic tap. Tap, tap, tap. 3 taps, and then silence. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but I was frozen, trapped by fear, my eyes glued to the door, half expecting it to burst inward. The silence stretched, long and agonizing. Then, very slowly, a faint scratching began directly over my head, on the roof. It was lighter than the scraping, more delicate, like something with long, slender fingers tracing patterns on the shingles. It moved around, circling the cabin, sometimes pausing directly above a window, then moving on. I tried to breathe, to calm myself, but it was impossible. My mind was screaming. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just observing. It was toying with me. It knew I was in here. It knew I was alone. The scratching stopped abruptly. The silence returned, thicker, more suffocating than before. And then the whispering started again. But this time, it wasn't just a distant sibilance. It was closer. So close, it sounded like it was right outside the window, just inches from my ear. It wasn't words, not in any language I knew. It was a series of drawn-out, breathy sounds, like wind rushing through reeds, punctuated by soft clicks. But there was a cadence to it, a rhythm, an almost musical quality that made it infinitely more terrifying. It was trying to communicate. Or perhaps it was communicating. It went on for what felt like an eternity, a bizarre, alien lullaby sung directly to me through the thin pane of glass. I gripped the rifle so hard my hands ached. My eyes darted around the cabin, looking for an escape, any escape. But there was nowhere to go. I was trapped. Trapped with something I couldn't comprehend. Something that was patiently, methodically wearing down my sanity. As the whispering continued, a new, horrifying realization dawned on me. The metallic sweet smell. It wasn't just in the air anymore. It was coming from me. I could smell it on my own skin, on my clothes. It was subtle at first, but now it was unmistakable. I raised my hand to my face, sniffing my palm. The smell was there, clinging to me like a shroud. Had it touched me? When? Had I breathed it in? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. What was this smell? What was it doing to me? And then, amidst the alien whispers and the sickly sweet scent, I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound, not from outside, but from inside the cabin. It was coming from the walls, a soft, dry scraping, like something was moving just beneath the surface of the wood. And it was getting closer. The scratching from inside the walls grew bolder, more distinct. It wasn't just a random scuttling, it sounded purposeful, a slow, methodical dragging, accompanied by a faint, dry rustle. It moved from one wall to another, circling the small cabin, echoing the movements of whatever was outside. It was as if I was caught in the center of a monstrous, unseen dance. My blood ran cold. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just outside anymore. It was in. Or rather, it had always been in, and I just hadn't noticed. Panic seized me, sharp and absolute. I scrambled backwards, pressing myself against the far wall, away from the sounds. The rifle, a dead weight in my hands, felt utterly useless. How do you shoot something that's inside the walls? The whispering outside intensified. A chorus of sibilant breaths and clicks, now joined by a low, resonant hum, that vibrated through the floorboards. It was a symphony of dread, designed to strip away my last vestiges of sanity. I thought about bolting, just opening the door and running blindly into the woods. But the image of that clawed footprint, the absolute blackness of the night, and the knowledge that whatever was out there had been toying with me for days held me captive. Running felt like surrendering to a different, perhaps worse fate. My eyes darted around the room, desperate for a clue, an explanation, anything. And then I saw it. Tucked away in a dusty corner beneath a stack of old newspapers was a small, leather-bound journal. It was my grandfather's. I recognized his familiar, looping handwriting on the faded cover. He rarely wrote in it. He was a man of action, not introspection. Curiosity, a dangerous ally in fear, gnawed at me. Perhaps, just perhaps, he knew something. With trembling hands, I reached for it. The metallic, sweet smell was thick in the air, making me gag. I flipped open the journal, my fingers fumbling. Most of the pages were blank or filled with mundane notes about repairs to the cabin, weather observations, or hunting logs. But near the back, scrawled in a frantic, almost illegible hand, were entries from the last few weeks of his life. The first few entries were mundane. Then they grew increasingly disturbed. He wrote about the quiet, how it was too quiet. He mentioned the scent, how it was getting stronger. And then the stone cairns. He called them markers. He wrote, "They're watching, always watching. They stack the stones. 3, always 3. My breath hitched. He knew. All this time, he knew. The next entry was a chilling progression. The whispering, heard it tonight, just outside the window. Not words, not human. It calls. And then the dreams start. Lucid. They show me things. He didn't elaborate on the things, but the terror in his handwriting was palpable. Then the final entry, dated only a few days before he was found unresponsive in his Atlanta home, miles away from the cabin. The words were large, distorted, as if written in a feverish haste. "It's in the walls. Heard it scratching. Follows the scent. My scent. It's inside me, trying to get out. It wants to go home." The last word was underlined repeatedly, smeared, as if he'd pressed the pen down with frantic force. "It's inside me." The words echoed in my mind. A cold, sickening realization. The smell on my skin. It wasn't from outside. It was coming from me. Just like my grandfather. This cabin, this place, it wasn't just a place of escape. It was a trap, a vessel, and I was the next host. The scratching inside the walls reached a crescendo, a rapid, frantic scuttling, accompanied by what sounded like dry, brittle laughter. The humming outside intensified, a low, guttural growl that shook the very foundations of the cabin. The whispers morphed, becoming louder, more defined, almost forming words, though still incomprehensible, alien. I dropped the journal, scrambling back until my spine hit the cold, rough wall. My eyes fixed on the point where the scratching was most intense, near the old, disused fireplace. The wood there seemed to bulge, to warp, as if something was pressing against it from within. A splintered crack appeared in the wood, then another, spreading rapidly like veins. The metallic, sweet smell was now so overpowering it stung my nostrils, made my eyes water. It was the smell of decay and something sickeningly alive. And then, from within the crack, I saw it. Not an eye, not a limb, just a pulsating, sickly green light radiating from within the wall. It was the same light I'd seen in the woods, the same light that had pulsed at the edge of the clearing. The whispering outside stopped abruptly. The humming ceased. The scratching within the walls went silent. All was utterly, profoundly quiet. A silence that was infinitely more terrifying than the cacophony that preceded it. My breath hitched. The green light intensified, growing brighter, more encompassing, illuminating the cracks in the wood, making them glow. The wood groaned, stressed to its breaking point. And then, with a sound like tearing fabric, a section of the wall splintered and burst inward, showering me with dust and wood chips. The smell was overwhelming, a suffocating cloud of that sweet metallic stench. And through the gaping hole in the wall, I saw it. Not a creature, not a monster in any conventional sense. It was a void, a swirling, inky blackness, impossibly deep, yet radiating that pulsing green light. It seemed to shimmer, to writhe, drawing the very air out of the cabin, making it hard to breathe. And from within that void, emanating from its impossible depths, came a low, satisfied sigh. It wasn't over. It wasn't leaving. It had simply changed rooms. It was here, and it was waiting for me to become home. My grandfather's words echoed, a desperate plea from beyond the grave. It wants to go home. My eyes darted to the shattered opening, then to the closed door, then back to the rifle still clutched in my trembling hands. The cabin was a cage, the woods outside an endless, terrifying expanse. I could feel the presence, a cold, ancient awareness pressing in on me from the void in the wall, from the very air I breathed. It was patient. It had all the time in the world, and I was its next host. The choice, if there was one, was mine to make. Stay and succumb, or run into the waiting darkness. But to where? And would it ever truly let me go? The silence of the cabin stretched, pregnant with unspeakable horror, and the green light pulsed, beckoning me into its depths.